Hello and welcome back to Psychology 303, the analysis of everyday behavior. This is Dr. Wendy Williams, and this lecture will be over Chapter 5, which is on extinction. So I guess I want to start off with some questions related to extinction in our everyday lives. So in real life, how often do you complete a task really well? You do a really good job, only to be met by indifference by the people around you. You do a really good job and you get a good grade on a paper, but your roommates don't really care. Or they're like, yeah, well, you always do really well, and they make no big deal out of it. What happens to the troublemaker in class when she stops misbehaving? Often she gets ignored. And how often do you fail to reinforce that special person in your life with a big reinforcer after they do something nice to you? You know, we're not only familiar with what it feels like to be put on extinction, have our behavior put on extinction, but often we're guilty of putting other people's behavior on extinction as well by ignoring it or by not reinforcing the behavior. So here's a soup Nazi. No soup for you. When the behavior no longer produces the reinforcer that maintains it, what you're going to see is the behavior is going to gradually decline. So just like on Seinfeld, when the soup Nazi says that you can't have any more soup, you might come back the next day and he might say no again, and maybe the third day you try again and he says no, but after that you're going to stop coming. So the real key to extinction is that you need to break the connection between behavior and its consequence, between behavior and its reinforcer. So that's really what we're doing, is we're breaking the relationship between behavior and the consequence that it normally produces so that it no longer produces that consequence. So extinction is defined as a unique schedule of reinforcement in which a previously reinforced behavior is no longer reinforced. When the reinforcer is identified through an ABC analysis, we then determine what the reinforcer is maintaining a behavior, and then we eliminate that reinforcer so that the behavior no longer produces that consequence. And the result is that the target behavior will tend to decline over time. You'll get less and less of the behavior. However, that's over the long haul. In the short run, you're likely to get two big groups of behavior called extinction bursts and emotional behaviors. And so let's take a look at what extinction looks like on a graph. Here's extinction in action. This is tantrum behavior, the length of time of screaming in minutes. And so we have a child who is participating in screaming tantrum behavior she's averaging right around 6 minutes in a given bout. So when she gets into a tantrum, she screams for about 6 minutes or so. And this is before we use extinction. Perhaps this behavior is being reinforced with parental attention. We then put that behavior on extinction. We're no longer going to pay attention to that behavior. We're going to walk away from that behavior and let her scream. And what happens initially is that the behavior will tend to increase. This is what we call an extinction burst. Right here we have 3 days of data where the behavior actually gets worse before it starts to decline. And so with extinction, these extinction bursts where behavior increases before it goes down, before it decreases, is common. And so we see a little extinction burst here for the first 3 days of treatment using extinction. And then we start to see the behavior decline, and gradually over the next week the behavior drops to around 0. So that's a pretty good example graphically of what happens during extinction. So with extinction, there are certain effects that you look for. You look for the response rate to gradually decline over time. That target behavior should occur less and less. You also tend to get slower extinction. It takes longer if the behavior has only been intermittently reinforced compared to when it's been on continuous reinforcement. And while there are many hypotheses about why that's happening, the one that I'm most comfortable with is, and that I'm convinced that is probably most accurate, is that it's hard to With intermittent reinforcement, you learn not only is the behavior strengthened, but the persistence of the behavior is strengthened. And so it's not just that the behavior produces a reinforcer, but persistent behavior in the absence of reinforcement ultimately leads to reinforcement. So when you put a behavior like that on extinction, it takes a lot longer to not only put the behavior, but also its persistence into extinction. Sometimes you will see a resurgence of other extinguished responses, maybe responses that serve similar functions in the past. You'll see the return of old behaviors. And you'll also see increases in response variability. You'll see small changes in the target behavior. You'll see the individual maybe change the location of where the behavior occurs, or maybe how they engage in the behavior. You know, we walk into the room and we flick the switch on the light, and the light doesn't go on. And then we kind of attack the light switch to see flipping it on and off, you know, and the way we do it might change the position of our arm, and we try flipping, and so you get little changes in the shape of the behavior and the way it unfolds. So some important points. Extinction only works correctly if you've identified what the main reinforcer is. Here we have Max, and Max is, he misbehaves in front of the class. And if we do an ABC analysis, we find that it's not to get a rise out of the teacher, but actually it's getting attention from his peers that is maintaining his misbehavior in class. And sending him to the principal's office might not actually stop the behavior. It could even reinforce it by allowing him to escape the task that the teacher has asked him to do. So what should you do to get rid of this kind of misbehavior? Well, the first answer is always do a functional assessment. Go in and watch and see what happens when he engages in misbehavior. If he gets confronted with the teacher or misbehaves in class, do his friends like egg him on? Do people laugh? Does he get attention? Does he get attention on the playground for being kind of a cool dude? Or is it really about the teacher's attention? When he goes to the principal's office, does the behavior tend to go down, or is it going up? And what's happening right before? Is the teacher asking him to do something that he's not very good at, or something that is difficult for him? So the first thing that should be done is an assessment. Once you identify what the reinforcer is and what consequences maintaining the behavior, you then can go in and change the consequence and maybe place that consequence on extinction. The trick here is to identify the reinforcer. Again, direct observation is the very best way to determine what the behavioral contingency is that's maintaining an unwanted behavior. Is it a reinforcer? Does he get an appetitive stimulus? Does he get attention or a tangible reinforcer for his misbehavior? Or is it escape or avoidance based? Does he get out of, ooh, that's misspelled. Let's see if I can fix it. I don't know if I can. There we go. Sorry. Is he escaping some unpleasant task? And that's what's maintaining the behavior. It's better to go to the office than to have to read aloud because I'm not very good at reading. So you need to be certain that you know what the critical consequence is before you can place it on extinction by removing that consequence, by removing that reinforcer. Okay, so once you figure out what to do and you decide that you're going to place a behavior on extinction, you need to be aware that there are several side effects of extinction, things that happen while extinction is progressing. The first one is that you can get unpleasant emotional effects. You can get frustration and aggression, tantrums, screaming, crying, hitting, kicking, tantrums. All of those things can be part of what happens when the behavior that used to produce reinforcers no longer does. Also, you should expect to see a temporary increase in the undesired target behavior. That extinction burst is something that you should expect. The behavior should get stronger. It should increase in frequency. It should last longer. should be more persistent before it starts to drop off. So you kind of have to anticipate that. If you decide that extinction is a treatment that you want to employ, then you need to be prepared for these emotional effects and this extinction burst. There's also something called spontaneous recovery, where the target behavior you might manage to get it extinguished today. So you get through the extinction burst and it starts to drop off, and then it drops to zero. When you come back tomorrow to deal with the same individual, you might find that the behavior comes back immediately. But if you put it back on extinction, it should decline into extinction faster. And each day you may still see little recoveries at the beginning of the day or at the beginning of that session, but then it should drop out faster and faster and faster each day. So emotional effects, you'll get an increase in the magnitude, the intensity, the size of the behavior that's going through extinction. Crying is going to become screaming. If the pop doesn't come out, we bang on the machine like this guy is kicking the vending machine. There's a very slow elevator in the psychology building. If you try to take the elevator, it is so slow. People will actually stand there and push the button over and over and over again, although it doesn't make any difference. They just do it because they're getting emotional because the elevator's not arriving in time. So you're seeing an extinction effect when that happens. When your keys get locked in the car, what do? Do you kick the car? Do you bang on the side of the car? Do you express your emotions? Yeah. So that frustration tends to come out. So you sort of have to expect that. Also the extinction burst that I mentioned, this short-lived sudden resurgence or increase in the desired behavior. Well, often what's happening is that they're just trying harder, or they're trying something slightly different. If crying doesn't work, maybe I'll try screaming. Or they might try a totally new behavior. They may stop and start begging. It's not if you go spend some time at the preschool here on campus, you'll see kids who are going into extinction on behaviors, and they'll start begging. They'll be like, please, 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 can I have that toy? Or please, 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 can I have a cookie? When my daughter was really little, her change in topography when I would say no or when I would ignore her request wasn't to just repeat the word please, please, please over and over again. Instead, she created a new word, and she would stand there with her arms folded in front of her in this kind of monobrow, and she would say, please. It was like please became a two-syllable word. Please, please. It was very funny. So you get these changes in the behavior that actually can be even more annoying than the one you're trying to get rid of. But the trick is to not give in. You can't give in during that extinction burst, or you're just going to strengthen the intensified behavior. So here's another graph. Here's a tantrum on a scale from 0 to 30. This might be minutes in the tantrum, or it could be on a scale, on the tantrum intensity scale. But this is an extinction burst crying for more cookies. And so we're at baseline. Here we are at baseline. We're right around 10. But when they start to do extinction, they start to ignore this child, the behavior peaks all the way up to around 27, maybe 27 minutes of crying about the cookies on day 7 or 8. And then it starts to drop off. And finally, you start seeing out around day 19, it starts to drop well below that 5-minute mark. So you want to make sure that you don't give in when the behavior's up here, because all you're doing now is reinforcing a stronger version of the behavior you had before. So choosing to do extinction and failing by giving in will actually make the behavior worse. So you have to be very careful the way you use it. And of course, we say never waste a good tantrum. So parents who rescue their kids whenever they cry are actually making the tantrums worse. I have a video I want to show you here. So let me see if I can pause this and bring up the video. Okay, so I'm going to start this video, and this is a little boy having a tantrum. And it's quite interesting to see how persistent he really is. So let's go ahead and start that. There we go. There he is. And the parents are videotaping this, and so he's crying in the other room, and everybody gets up and walks into the living room. It gets really quiet. Watch. Let me get rid of that. There. Oh! And so he comes back out where they can see him, and he throws himself on the floor. And they just walk away, ignoring the behavior. Even the dog walks away. And they disappear into the kitchen with the video camera. And they do it again. He's really thrown a tantrum. So you can see this extinction burst happening. He's just so committed to this. And it's not working. So he's being even more dramatic. Okay. So let me close that. There we go. And let me get this back to my screen here. Sorry about this. Okay, so there we have our tantrum. I love that video. It's awesome. So the trick to effective extinction is really twofold. One, you need to make sure that you identify the correct reinforcer. And once you know what the reinforcer is and you eliminate it, you need to be very consistent. Never follow the behavior with a reinforcer again. So you have to make sure that you never deliver that reinforcer. So you have to pick your battles. You may not want to use extinction on everything because it will make your world chaotic, but sometimes it can be very, very effective. So the question is, will it work? Well, number one, just don't give in. Stick to your guns. You can't start extinction and then give in. Giving in will actually result in making the problem behavior worse than it was when you started. So by reinforcing the behavior and its persistence in the absence of reinforcement, when you give a reinforcer after ignoring it for a while, you're strengthening the behavior and the persistence of that behavior. So behaviors that are followed by intermittent reinforcement become really resistant to extinction for this very reason. That's what makes it hard to get rid of those behaviors. So you want to make sure that you're really careful to, let's see, what did I say? I said, identify the correct reinforcer and eliminate it. Be consistent, never follow the behavior with a reinforcer, and just don't give in. Just don't give in. Stick to your guns, and that will work. Here's a cartoon. It's a rat who's been working for pellets in the lab, and there are the researchers watching them, and the rat is freaking out. He says, "They took my pellets, man. I've been hitting that lever all day. They took my pellets." So he's freaked out because they put him on extinction, and pressing the lever no longer works. Well, I almost was able to get the dogs barking off of the tape. I'm sorry. So that's the last slide for this this lecture on extinction, and our lecture for chapter 14 is on applying extinction. So we're going to return to extinction a little bit in the last lecture. Okay, have a good day.